Hey everyone, it's Zane, and today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on Under Rose-Tainted Skies by Louise Gournal. Before I get into this review, I do want to place a quick trigger warning for self-harm within this book. It isn't something I'll be getting into in this review, however, it is present within the book, so please be mindful of that. I don't know how to describe this book without making it sound a little bit cliche. I would read off of the book, but I do want to practice with my own summaries of the synopsis. Basically, it follows our main character, Nora, who's been diagnosed with both agoraphobia and OCD. She also experiences anxiety. For clarity's sake, I am actually going to quickly define these two disorders. So OCD is characterized by unwanting and intrusive, obsessive or distressing images, thoughts, and impulses that create significant anxiety. It is often accompanied by compulsive behaviors that are frequently repetitive and excessive, and they appear to be irrational to the person. Agoraphobia is a type of anxiety disorder in which you fear and avoid places or situations that might cause you to panic and make you feel trapped, helpless, or embarrassed. Now, as you can imagine, it's not easy for Nora living with these disorders. She's essentially stuck in her house because she feels as though if she leaves the house, she'll have a panic attack or something very bad will happen. So Nora is just trying to cope with these disorders, and then a boy moves in next door, and trust me, it's not as cliche as it sounds. Really quickly, you start to see Nora and this boy Luke start to cultivate a relationship, and Luke starts to see Nora for more than just her illness. The problem is Nora has a lot of difficulty with this because she feels like a liability. Nora doesn't want Luke to miss out on all the things that he otherwise could be doing because of Nora's illnesses. But for Luke, all he really wants is to break her walls. So for this review, I'm actually going to go through all but one of my pros, my cons. I'm going to name a song that really fits this book, and then I'm going to give my final pro/takeaway message from this book, and then I'm going to get into a spoilery section. So the first thing I really liked about this book was the representation. While it isn't something I can directly speak to, based on my studies in psychology, it was very well researched. So I know this book is actually coming from a place of both research and personal experience, as it is own voices, and that really came across. It was so hard being inside Nora's head, it almost made me uncomfortable just because of the nature of the disorders. It was written so beautifully and so vividly to the point where I physically felt what Nora was feeling at times. I think in that respect, Louise Gournal definitely accomplished her goal, because to make a reader understand what it's like for someone with these disorders, I think is just the ultimate goal. I also really enjoyed Nora as a character. I just found her to be so engaging and interesting, and I really liked how her mental illness did not overcome her identity. I just think it's so important in any mental health fiction to make sure that the characters don't become their illnesses, because people in real life aren't their illnesses. They're people first, you know? While I also enjoyed Luke as a character, I did find myself questioning his character at times, just because it seemed a little unrealistic to have someone just so intrigued and engaged after you see someone having a panic attack. It seemed like he was just a little bit too persistent. It was just a little unrealistic for me, but that might be my own negative perception of the state of our world when it comes to mental health. I love the relationship between Nora and her mom, because you could tell that Nora's mom was worried about her at times, but she didn't really show it as much just because she had to be strong for the both of them when Nora couldn't be. And Dr. Reeves and her cognitive behavioral techniques were great as well. Again, based on my studies in psychology, it was something that was done very accurately. I just think it's so important to have therapy represented in mental health fiction. A lot of the times it isn't, and characters have to kind of deal with their mental illnesses on their own, and sometimes that could just get a little bit bleak. So now I'm actually just going to talk about a bunch of themes I really enjoyed. So the first theme I have is mental illness is a daily struggle, and it doesn't just go away. A great quote for this is, "It stalks me incessantly. See, anxiety doesn't just stop. You can have nice moments, minutes where it shrinks, but it doesn't leave. It lurks in the background like a shadow, like that important assignment you have to do but keep putting off, or the dull ache that follows a 3-day migraine. The best you can hope for is to contain it. Make it as small as possible so it stops being intrusive." I just thought this was great because it's so true. Anyone who has dealt with mental illness or symptoms of mental illness will tell you that, you know, some days can be great, some days aren't so great, but it never truly just disappears. No matter the severity of your mental illness, it is a daily struggle for all of us, I would say. Another really important theme was the idea that mental illness is an invisible illness. A great quote for this was, "How can you expect people to empathize with an illness they can't see?" I think this is just such an important theme because, you know, if someone breaks a bone, they have a cast, you know exactly what's wrong. But if someone is going through a mental health challenge, you can't be inside their head to know exactly what's happening. And, you know, it might be even hard for the person going through the mental illness to know what's happening. But again, that doesn't make it any less valid because it's still an illness and it should be treated just as seriously as a physical illness. Another idea I liked was the idea that just because you may not have a mental illness yourself, you can still be affected by it through friends and family, or you can experience symptoms of mental illness without actually being diagnosed. This was illustrated really well with Luke. You could tell that even though he himself may not have a major mental illness that we know of, he still has been affected by it throughout his life, which is maybe part of the reason why he was so sympathetic towards Nora. I also want to quickly talk about the idea of saving someone or being saved. At first, when I started reading this book, I was like, no, I'm not going to read this book if it's just going to be about a guy saving a girl. But it really wasn't like that. And again, I don't want to spoil too much in this section. However, I do feel like this book definitely wasn't one where the guy was saving the girl from her mental illness. And honestly, even if it panned out that way, I don't know if I would have been too upset depending on the execution. Just because throughout this book you can see that Luke really cared about Nora and he wanted her to be better. And in real life, no one goes through mental illness alone. Yes, it is something that you need to take accountability for, but sometimes we do need someone to save us. We do need someone to be there for us, and I think this book illustrated that really well. I also really appreciated the writing in this book, specifically the metaphors. I feel like they created a really good sense of imagery and allowed the reader to really picture what Nora was going through. Now for things I didn't resonate with as much, I think one of them was, again, Luke as a character, and some of his actions, again, just felt a little bit inconsistent with what I would imagine a regular high school teenager would act like. But again, I think that's easily refuted just because I'm sure there are people out there, especially people like Luke, who have gone through mental illness indirectly, who would act in a way that he acted. Another con that's a little bit more solid for me was I didn't like the ending of this book. I'm not going to spoil anything, but it was a little bit inconsistent with the rest of the book in that the resolution was more external, while the events of the story and the conflict was a little bit more internal. I know that is so ridiculously vague and unhelpful, but I will get into it in the spoilery section if you're going to stick around for that. Now, a song that I think really fits this book is In My Blood by Shawn Mendes. I just think both that song and this book have themes of needing somebody and feeling trapped. Shawn Mendes himself said this song was about him dealing with his anxiety, and anxiety is obviously a really common thing that is present within the book. Now for my final pro/takeaway message from this book, it was the idea of bravery and how people with mental illnesses are brave. There's a point in the novel where Luke tells Nora that she's really brave for doing what she does every day. Nora's kind of thrown off by this and says, "What are you talking about? I'm not brave. I don't feel brave." I thought this was just so poignant because anyone with a mental illness would tell you that bravery is probably the last thing that they feel when they're going through what they're going through. But it really is a form of bravery. So for anyone going through a mental illness or anything really, know that even if you don't feel like it, you are brave, because for doing what you have to do every single day and to keep on fighting is a form of bravery. So yeah guys, that's it for my non-spoilery section. If you don't want to get spoiled, please leave now and I will see you soon with a new video. So I honestly don't have too many spoilery thoughts. Again, at the beginning of this book, when Nora's having a panic attack and Luke is really intrigued by this, I don't know how I felt about it, just because, again, I know this is the third time I'm saying this, I don't know how realistic it would have been to have that kind of reaction, but it was nice to see that that's what kind of precipitated their ultimate relationship. I honestly don't know how I felt about the scene where Luke kissed Nora, just because he was so great with respecting her boundaries and her illness up until that point, and it just seemed a little like he lost control completely, which was a little inconsistent with how I imagined his character to be. But I'm really glad that that scene was handled well, because it wasn't like a magical cure where the guy's kiss saves the girl from her illness. It was, you know, a really big deal for Nora, and it was a negative reaction from her. Now earlier I talked about how the resolution, or the climax rather, was a little bit too external rather than internal. What I mean by that is there's a home invasion while Nora is in the house alone, and that's kind of what forces her to leave her house and call Luke and, you know, seek out help. And the fact that the next scene is her in the hospital with a bunch of IVs and her indirectly and kind of inadvertently confronting her illness was a little confusing for me, and I just thought that the resolution could have been more internal. It could have been something that came from Nora as a result of everything that happened with Luke and, you know, seeing that there's someone that appreciated her for who she is. But again, even that may have been a bit unrealistic, so I don't know. I feel like I would have been complaining about the ending either way just because of the nature of the story. It was very difficult to have an ending where, you know, you're perfectly satisfied with it. So yeah, that's actually all I have to say regarding spoilers. I basically said most of it in my non-spoilery section. So once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you soon with a new video.